Before I start this video, I'd like to say a huge shout out to the HQ squad. They've been a massive help in my videos. I'd like to say a huge shout out to the team, specifically Nyotic and Slick. They were a huge help in this video. This video would not be possible without them, so huge shout out to them. So, Captain Forrest here. I'm going to go ahead and go into the DC Cosmology. It's been long awaited. I've been needing to make this video for a long time. Of course, making cosmology videos can be difficult. You get a lot of mixed reviews, mixed opinions. People either agree or don't, but that's neither here or there. That doesn't matter to me. What matters to me the most is providing content, providing good educational videos, and of course some good scaling and some solid research. Now, of course, with the DC cosmology, people have different interpretations. There's people that literally only have like the verse at 5D or 6D, which is very silly. I'll be going over a lot of things in this video, so even like newcomers who are new to like DC and stuff, they can refer to this video every time I make, DC related content. Now, there are two things I want to address. Of course, there is the character stats and profiles, and then there's the versus wiki sites. They both have, their respective tiering systems, and they both differ in their own unique way. Now, of course, Extraversal is a tier that is used primarily and is actually made up by character stats and profiles. When we look at versus wiki, their highest tier is Boundless. They don't use Extraversal. I don't know if that will change, but in this video I will be talking about Extraversal scaling too, because DC can reach Extraversal very easily. In fact, I think Extraversal is becoming a very cumbersome tier. A lot of like scaling in the DC verse, I think it's just beyond 1S at this point, aka Extraversal. But regardless, that's neither here or there. I'm gonna go ahead and dive right into the meat and potatoes of things. I'm gonna start with the bleed, and then I'm gonna go up all the way into the overvoid. So let's begin. To start things off, we have the bleed being on the same level as or even above the time stream. This is showcased by how the monitors, when inside the time stream, they state that the bleed is something they can't see or control. This means that even beings that exist on the same level as the time stream is actually below the bleed. Now, for why this is impressive is that we have consistent statements for the time stream being as beyond time and space, and it was also stated as being unaffected by the confines of time and dimensions. Far beyond the bleed is the sphere of the gods. You may be wondering, how far beyond the bleed is it? Now, in my previous videos, I explained to you all that the sphere of the gods is conceptually beyond the bleed, as it's been described as a platonic archetypal world, the great realm of archetypal powers and intelligences. We've established this as being in the outerversal ballpark before, and due to conceptually transcending a high hyperversal structure, aka the bleed. However, applying the outerversal scaling that was presented for the bleed, the sphere of the gods skyrockets up to high outerversal. But there's more to this. That's actually the lowest scaling. That's like some safe scaling if you want to go by it. That's like the normal standard scaling you'd give, like the typical hierarchy for DC. But what if I told you the godsphere is even greater than high outerversal? Well, folks, watch and learn as I take the DC cosmology to new heights. There is more information as regards to the godsphere. The Spectre states that there are different levels of heaven. When he was explaining to a dead soul what heaven was, he notes that his existence on earth and universe is a dream. Once he takes this soul to the gates of heaven, he tells him that every higher heaven is a higher level or a more fundamental dream than the lower heaven. Essentially, we know the lowest heaven is at least conceptually beyond everything below it, and since the sphere refers to both the mortal plane and the heavens as dreams, we can say that every higher dream or heaven would be a conceptual gap. Another thing that would support the conceptual gap is that dreams in DC have been repeatedly stated to be archetypal, and Dream of the Endless himself has stated a human's dream allows you to enter the dreaming, another realm in the godsphere. The reason for why heaven would be extraversal is attributed by these points. When the Phantom Stranger traveled through heaven to find newly departed souls that went to heaven, he describes himself traveling through the entirety of heaven, getting to the very end. He talks about how he goes through the different levels of heaven and the different levels of how far each soul has progressed through its development cycle. The part that gives the high altar part is when the Phantom Stranger notes that some have left the illusion of flesh and individual identity behind. This is important because in the past, the Phantom Stranger stated that angels are unfettered by the base demands of flesh when he was talking to beings that had three-dimensional bodies, which means that the gap between seeing these things would be a conceptual gap or an outer gap if you use that term. This would effectively prove high outerversal. To prove that this process repeats itself infinitely, we would have to look at the Phantom Stranger's scan again. He walks through to the end of heaven, and when he gets to the end, he finds the newly departed souls he was searching for, which means that the baseline heaven would scale above everything I mentioned, and then it would start its own development cycle and have the same type of conceptual to outer gap. Zoriel even mentions how these souls would then depart to even deeper levels of heaven, showing that not only are they going to get more developed, but that heaven is that big to contain this all. Then a new heaven would form from a soul that sits on top of that, and this would repeat infinitely, meaning that this gets to extraversal. Very impressive. Another thing that supports 1S heaven and 1S godsphere in general is because hell is a realm that is the same size as heaven. It's even stated that there are many hells as there are souls in creation. Hell is stated to be a metaphysical realm, meaning that each hell in the hierarchy is a higher level of metaphysics, further supporting the conceptual gaps of each layer in heaven. Something physical can't reach something metaphysical, and this is because the first level of metaphysics is beyond the concepts of space, time, and dimensions, and each hell would be a higher level of metaphysics. Now, after the sphere of the gods, we have Limbo, which is at least infinitely to inaccessibly beyond the sphere of the gods, followed by the monitor sphere. The monitor sphere is an archetypal realm and fundamental world where everything is more profound and absolute, and was described as a realm of nothingness beyond the multiverse, the bleed, the sphere of the gods, and even Limbo, which means it's conceptually beyond everything I previously mentioned. The source wall is stated to be beyond infinity. The source wall is the edge of creation. The new gods have spent a long time trying to figure out the secrets of the source, but could never get past the source wall. And since the new gods have access to things like boom tubes, which can make a human the same size as a new god, that means boom tubes can allow you to go to the realms conceptually above you, but they couldn't figure out a way to get past the source wall, which means they can't boom tube themselves past the source wall, and therefore conceptual layers can't reach the source wall. During Green Lantern Godhead, it was shown repeatedly that new gods can boom tube themselves past the monitor sphere, which is conceptually beyond the god sphere. Now that I've talked about the source wall, I like to talk about something called the antimatter universe. Now, because the source wall currently in current creation, in new creation, it's destroyed. We all know what happened when Perpetua broke the wall apart. The antimatter universe is basically the anti-monitor's realm, which was originally meant to guard the boundaries of creation, which is what the source wall was doing until it was destroyed, and that is also why it was in the same location as the source wall. So it's basically another band-aid for the universe, essentially for creation. So it basically takes the place for the source wall, essentially. Nothing different, nothing too different at least. But yes, I just wanted to mention that the antimatter universe, that is what currently is the barrier around creation, and it's not the source wall anymore. The source wall is completely gone. It's in pieces, floating in space or wherever it's floating. Now, the fifth dimension. There is an interesting statement by Our Man, who notes to Shazam, who is also extraversal, stating that the creatures in the fifth dimension and their abilities are far beyond Our Man's, as Our Man's are beyond Shazam's. This is very impressive and a really good statement, demonstrating an extraversal difference of the fifth dimension and those with the power of it in comparison to others below it. As showcased in previous videos, all of creation exists outside the fourth dimension. Then we have the fifth dimension. The fifth dimension is described as existing everywhere, and that it's outside of time, which is the name of the fourth dimension. Now the fifth dimension is described as a higher plane of existence, that's more complex than the lower forms. Mixie also tells us that beings like him couldn't exist in a higher dimension, showcasing how beings from lower dimensions can't exist in higher ones. This would make the fifth dimension one inaccessible transcendence above the monotosphere. Mr. Mixie in particular has shown himself to scale directly to the fifth dimension, destroying it without any effort in World's Funniest. Worldforger on his own being from the sixth dimension, which Mixie notes that he himself would be unable to survive existing in. Perpetua is the mother of the multiverse, which comprises of infinite timelines and fourth dimensional layers of existence, that the highest being, sixth dimension, a realm that isn't just beyond the fifth dimension, no, it's beyond the source wall itself. And to beings in the sixth dimension, all of existence is like a ball that they can easily grab hold of. Now let's talk about the source itself. Now everything except the overvoid and the greater omniverse, such as the fifth and the sixth dimension, are all creations from the source. Perpetua made creation and the sixth dimension with the energies from the source, and the source is also a place where gods reside, and the gods who die are resurrected back into the source, and the source itself is pretty much above a lot of things in creation, except for the overvoid. And speaking of the overvoid, this is going to be the final realm that we're going to cover in DC. So yeah, let's move on to the overvoid. So the origins of the DC cosmology come from the overvoid, and the overvoid has been there since the very beginning. The overvoid itself is a realm of nothingness, where no matter how much you try to fill the overvoid, in the end it will all amount to zero. And before Lucifer said this himself, he had experienced infinite repeats and infinite repetitions in the void, telling us that even the infinite repeats that exist in it will just amount to zero. This would actually tell us that the overvoid is a higher level of infinity above the infinite repeats of creation, which is completely insane. This is like very huge, crazy scaling. So overall, the DC cosmology is absolutely huge. It is a very powerful verse in its own right. Now, depending on what scaling you use for the cosmology and what interpretations you go off, if you only use low end to mid end feats, the verse is easily high ultraversal, very high into the tier. Boundless, very high into the tier 2. And if you want to take it a step higher into the extraversal realms, it can easily reach extraversal and very high into extraversal. Now, I've heard of a thing called Type 4. There are a lot of Type 4 arguments for DC, but I will not be going over them in this video. It's way too much, way too complicated. I'll probably talk about that at some later date. But regardless, this is the DC cosmology. That is my interpretation. I'm Captain Forrest, and I'm signing out. Peace.